She thought she knew everything about her mother, until a billionaire's daughter walked into her cafe with a secret buried for decades, a hidden past, a powerful family desperate to keep it quiet, and one woman determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. What she found, it changed everything. Stay with us because this story is just getting started. Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead as Naomi Brooks wiped down the counter at JetBrew Cafe. The late shift at Briarwick International Airport had its usual rhythm. Travelers dragging their suitcases across the tile floor, airline employees grabbing their last cup of coffee before heading to their hotels, and security guards making their routine rounds. It was predictable, steady. Naomi liked steady. She glanced at the clock above the coffee machines. 1:27 a.m. Just another hour and a half before she could clock out and head home to her tiny apartment on the city's south side. The place wasn't much, but it was hers. Quiet, safe, a space that was untouched by the chaos of the airport or the ghosts of the past that sometimes crept into her thoughts when she was alone too long. She poured a fresh pot of coffee, the rich aroma filling the air as the front doors slid open. She didn't look up right away. Most late-night customers were either pilots needing caffeine or exhausted passengers hoping to stay awake during a layover. But then she heard the sharp tap of heels against the floor, the precise rhythm standing out from the usual shuffle of sneakers and rolling luggage. Naomi looked up just as a woman stepped into the cafe, her presence immediately commanding attention. She was tall, poised, and carried herself like she owned the room. Her navy blue flight attendant uniform was crisp, her dark brown hair slicked back into a flawless bun, and the subtle gleam of a gold nameplate caught the light as she approached the counter. Vivian Hartley. Naomi recognized her immediately, not because they had met before, Naomi had never spoken to her, but because everyone in the airport knew who she was. Vivian Hartley wasn't just any flight attendant. She was the daughter of Richard Hartley, the late founder of Hartley International Air, one of the most powerful airline companies in the country. Though she technically worked as part of the crew, everyone knew she didn't have to. She was Hartley royalty, flying for the sake of image rather than necessity. Naomi straightened, reaching for a notepad out of habit. "What can I get for you?" Vivian barely glanced at the menu. "Black coffee." Her voice was cool, effortless, like she was used to making requests and having them met without question. Naomi turned, filling a to-go cup with the steaming liquid, feeling the weight of the woman's gaze on her. As she turned back around, she caught a glimpse of Vivian reaching into her purse to pull out her wallet, and that's when it happened. Something slipped from between the leather folds and fluttered to the floor, landing just beside the counter. At first, Naomi didn't think much of it. A receipt? A boarding pass? But then her eyes landed on the small, worn photograph, and her breath caught in her throat. It was a picture of her mother. Not just any picture, a photograph Naomi knew all too well. Her mother, Diana Brooks, stood in the frame, her gentle smile familiar in a way that made Naomi's chest tighten. She had seen this exact photo before, in a small wooden box her mother used to keep tucked away in their old apartment. Her pulse pounded as she bent down, fingers brushing against the glossy surface as she picked it up. Why did Vivian Hartley have this? She gripped the photo tightly, swallowing the lump rising in her throat. When she looked up, Vivian was staring at her, a flicker of something. Was it recognition? Crossing her otherwise unreadable expression. Naomi held the photograph up. "Where did you get this?" For the first time, Vivian's composed mask slipped, just for a second. Then just as quickly, she smoothed her features back into place, reaching for the photo as if it were nothing more than a misplaced receipt. "You must be mistaken." Naomi didn't let go. "No, I'm not." Her voice came out firmer than she expected. "Why do you have a picture of my mother?" Vivian's fingers tightened around the edge of the photo for a brief moment before she snatched it away, slipping it back into her wallet with a quiet, practiced ease. "I don't owe you an explanation." Naomi's stomach twisted. The casual dismissal, the way Vivian brushed past the question like it was meaningless, it made her blood heat. "I think you do." Vivian exhaled, her patience clearly wearing thin. She pulled a crisp $50 bill from her wallet, placed it on the counter, and turned on her heel. This conversation is over. Before Naomi could react, Vivian was already walking toward the door, her posture stiff, controlled. Panic surged through Naomi's chest. This might be her only chance to find out the truth. She dropped the notepad, hurried around the counter, nearly knocking over a stack of coffee cups as she rushed after her. "Wait!" But Vivian didn't stop. She was already stepping outside, heading toward the black sedan idling by the curb, where a driver was already holding the door open for her. Naomi reached the doorway just as Vivian turned back, her expression completely unreadable now. "Tell me how you knew her," Naomi demanded. Her voice was steady, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. For a split second, something shifted in Vivian's gaze. A hesitation, a crack in the armor. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. She stepped into the car, her voice cold as she spoke the last words Naomi would hear from her that night. "Forget this." The door shut. The engine purred. And before Naomi could take another step, the car disappeared into the night, leaving her standing alone on the sidewalk, her breath uneven, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. A billionaire's daughter had just walked into her cafe carrying a piece of her past, and she had left Naomi with more questions than she could count. Who was Vivian Hartley to her mother, and why was she acting like Naomi didn't deserve to know? As the cold night air pressed against her skin, one thing became painfully clear. She wasn't letting this go. Naomi sat at her small kitchen table staring at the glow of her laptop screen. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sound of a car passing outside. She had been sitting there for hours, trying to piece together what had just happened. The moment kept replaying in her head. Vivian Hartley standing at the counter, that photo slipping from her wallet, the way she had shut down the conversation so quickly. Naomi's fingers hovered over the keyboard, her search bar already filled with the name Vivian Hartley. She hit enter. A flood of results appeared. Articles, interviews, social media accounts. Vivian was practically a celebrity in the airline industry, the daughter of a business mogul, a frequent name in high society circles. But nothing in those polished headlines explained why she had a picture of Naomi's mother. Naomi scrolled through pages of news articles until she landed on an old obituary for Richard Hartley, Vivian's father. The man had been larger than life, a billionaire who built Hartley International Air from the ground up. His death had been sudden, heart complications at just 65. She clicked on the article. A photo of him appeared at the top of the page. Tall, silver-haired, a strong jawline, piercing blue eyes. Naomi stared at it for a long moment, searching for something familiar, some recognition. But the man in the photograph was a stranger. She exhaled, rubbing her temple. This wasn't enough. Naomi switched her search, this time typing in Diana Brooks plus Hartley International Air. Nothing. Her mother had worked at Briarwick International for nearly 2 decades, but as far as the internet was concerned, there was no connection between her and the Hartleys. Naomi clicked back, scrolling through photos of Vivian, stopping on an image of her standing at a charity gala, wearing a sleek black gown, champagne flute in hand. She looked untouchable, like someone who had never had to explain herself to anyone in her life. Naomi clenched her jaw. If she wasn't going to get answers online, she'd have to find another way. She shut the laptop and stood, moving to the small wooden box she kept on the shelf in her closet, her mother's keepsakes. Inside were old letters, postcards, a few scattered photographs. Naomi carefully sifted through them, her breath catching when she found the very same photograph she had seen in Vivian's wallet. She turned it over. There, in her mother's neat handwriting, were 2 words, "For Richard." Naomi's stomach tightened. Richard. Could it be? She grabbed her phone and dialed the only person she knew who might have some answers. The call rang 3 times before a voice picked up, groggy and annoyed. "Naomi, it's..." A pause, then, more awake now. "Are you okay?" Marcus Reed had been a technician for Hartley International Air before he was fired under mysterious circumstances. He had always warned Naomi about the company, told her it was run by people who had no interest in fairness or decency. "Marcus," Naomi said, gripping the phone, "I need your help." Another pause. "What's going on?" Naomi hesitated. Saying it out loud felt dangerous, like she was crossing into something she couldn't take back. But she had come too far to stop now. I think my mother knew Richard Hartley. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Naomi checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then, Marcus exhaled sharply. I'll be at your place in 20 minutes. When Marcus arrived, he looked at Naomi like she had just told him the sky had turned green. You're serious? He said, stepping inside and shutting the door behind him. Naomi held up the photograph, flipping it to the back so he could see the name. Does this prove anything? Marcus frowned, taking the picture from her. I mean, it proves they knew each other, but it doesn't tell us what their relationship was. He studied it for another second, then looked back at her. What are you thinking? Naomi sat back down at her laptop, reopening her search. I need to know if my mother ever worked directly for Hartley International Air. If she did, there should be records. Marcus shook his head. If she was involved with Richard Hartley in any way that the family wanted hidden, I doubt there'll be anything public. Naomi swallowed, her fingers hesitating over the keys. Then I'll have to find another way in. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You planning on breaking into the corporate archives or something? Naomi huffed a laugh, but the truth was, she didn't know how far she was willing to go. Not yet. What about Vivian? Marcus asked. She clearly knows something. Maybe you just need to press harder. Naomi exhaled, shaking her head. I don't think she'll talk to me willingly. Marcus leaned against the table, crossing his arms. Then we make her. Naomi looked at him. How? A slow smirk spread across Marcus's face. By putting her in a position where she can't ignore you. Naomi's heartbeat picked up. You have a plan? Marcus nodded. There's a private event next week at the Hartley corporate headquarters downtown. Executives, high-ranking employees, investors. If you can get in, you'll be surrounded by the people who know exactly who Richard Hartley was and what he did. Naomi hesitated. How do I even get in? Marcus shrugged. Leave that part to me. Naomi exhaled slowly, her mind already spinning with possibilities. This was dangerous. If Vivian had already shut her down once, she wouldn't hesitate to do it again. But Naomi also knew one thing with absolute certainty. If she walked away now, she'd never forgive herself. Naomi spent the next few days trying to act normal, but the truth was, her mind hadn't stopped racing since that night. The discovery of her mother's photograph in Vivian's wallet had opened a door she could no longer close. She moved through her shifts at JetBrew Cafe on autopilot, handing out coffee, making small talk with customers, but her thoughts were always elsewhere. Back on Richard Hartley, on her mother, on the connection she couldn't explain. Every time she tried to push the thought away, it came back stronger. By the time she met up with Marcus again, she was done waiting. They sat across from each other in a small diner on the south side of Chicago. The place was nearly empty, the hum of an old ceiling fan filling the silence between them. Naomi stirred the straw in her iced tea, eyes locked on Marcus. You said you could get me into that Hartley event, she said. How? Marcus leaned back in the booth, arms crossed. There's a junior flight crew that rotates between company events. They serve drinks, hand out name tags, mostly just there for appearance. Naomi narrowed her eyes. And you think I can just sneak in as one of them? Marcus shrugged. You've worked in an airport for years. You know how to blend in. It's a cocktail party, not a security briefing. He paused. And you'd have a perfect excuse to talk to Vivian. Naomi considered it. It was risky. If Vivian recognized her, she'd be thrown out before she could get any answers. But if Naomi didn't do something now, she'd spend the rest of her life wondering. What happens if I get caught? She asked. Marcus smirked. Then you run really fast. Naomi exhaled through her nose, half amused, half frustrated. That's your plan? Marcus lifted his hands. I'm not saying it's foolproof, but you're the one who wants answers. This is your shot. Naomi pressed her lips together. He wasn't wrong. She had spent too many years accepting the unknown, too many years letting unanswered questions sit in the back of her mind like forgotten luggage. That stopped now. All right, she said, meeting his gaze. I'm in. Marcus grinned. Good, because I already got you a uniform. Naomi blinked. What? Marcus reached down, pulling a neatly folded Hartley International Air uniform from a brown paper bag. You seriously? She shook her head, a laugh escaping her. You already knew I was going to say yes. Marcus grinned. I had a feeling. Naomi picked up the uniform, running her fingers over the smooth fabric. It looked identical to the ones she had seen Vivian wear, the same navy blue with gold accents, the same subtle embroidered logo on the sleeve. The thought of actually wearing it, of walking into that building as if she belonged there, made her stomach tighten. Marcus studied her expression. You sure about this? Naomi took a breath. No, she wasn't, but she also knew she wasn't turning back. Yeah, she said, gripping the fabric. I'm sure. The night of the event, Naomi stood in front of her tiny bathroom mirror, adjusting the uniform. The fit was eerily perfect, as if it had been made for her. The navy blue fabric hugged her frame, the gold accents catching the dim light of her apartment. She had pulled her curls back into a tight bun, smoothed out any stray hairs. She needed to look the part. She studied her reflection, fingers gripping the edge of the sink. For years, she had felt invisible. A barista at an airport cafe, serving drinks to pilots, executives, and flight attendants who never really saw her. Tonight, she wasn't invisible. Tonight, she was walking straight into their world. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Marcus. Marcus. Car's downstairs. You ready? Naomi let out a slow breath. No turning back now. Naomi. Yeah, let's do this. The drive downtown was quiet. Marcus focused on the road while Naomi stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past. The Hartley International headquarters loomed ahead, a massive glass skyscraper in the heart of downtown Chicago, the company's name lit up in bold white letters near the top. The street was lined with sleek black cars, chauffeurs waiting for executives and investors. Naomi's fingers curled in her lap. All right, Marcus said, pulling up a block away. You go in through the service entrance. The crew is already inside. Naomi swallowed. And if I get caught? Marcus smirked. Try not to. Naomi exhaled, shaking her head as she pushed open the door. See you on the other side, she muttered. The service entrance was just past the main lobby, a narrow hallway leading to the back of the event space. Naomi blended in with the other crew members, adjusting the tray in her hands as she stepped into the grand ballroom. It was stunning, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline, crystal chandeliers casting a soft glow over the elegantly dressed guests. And then, her eyes landed on Vivian. She stood near the bar, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable, talking to a group of executives. Naomi's pulse kicked up. This was it. She took a breath, steadying herself before stepping forward. Naomi steadied the tray in her hands, her fingers gripping the edges to keep them from shaking. The ballroom was buzzing with conversation, the clink of glasses and soft notes of live jazz filling the air. Everywhere she looked, she saw wealth. Men in tailored suits, women in designer gowns, each person moving effortlessly through the space as if they had been born to belong here. But Naomi wasn't here to admire the luxury. She was here for answers. She kept her movements smooth and practiced, blending in with the other servers who moved through the crowd with trays of champagne. She had spent years working at the airport cafe. Serving people was second nature. If she acted like she belonged, no one would question her, except maybe Vivian Hartley. Naomi's eyes flickered toward her again. She stood near the bar, poised as ever, nodding along as an older man, some high-ranking executive, judging by the way others deferred to him, spoke. Vivian hadn't noticed her yet. Naomi's heart pounded. She knew she couldn't just march up to her and demand answers. She had to be smart. She took a slow breath and made her way toward the bar, setting her tray down beside the other drinks as she pretended to adjust the placement. She was close now, close enough to hear the conversation. The expansion should be finalized by next quarter, the executive was saying, swirling the dark liquid in his glass. We'll see how the numbers look, but if it keeps trending this way, we'll surpass transatlantic by the end of next year. Vivian smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That's what my father always wanted. Naomi's fingers tightened on the edge of the tray. Her father. Richard Hartley's name had never meant anything to her before, but now it sat heavy in her mind, tangled with the image of her mother's handwriting on the back of that photograph. She forced herself to keep moving, picking up an empty glass and turning slightly, just enough to brush past Vivian's arm. Vivian turned, eyes narrowing slightly before recognition set in. For a second, her carefully composed mask slipped. Naomi didn't give her a chance to recover. She set the empty glass down, straightened, and looked Vivian right in the eye. "We need to talk." Vivian blinked, but her surprise lasted only a moment before she schooled her features back into that familiar, unreadable expression. "You shouldn't be here," she said, voice calm but firm. Naomi lifted her chin. "And yet, here I am." Vivian glanced around, no doubt aware of the eyes on them. She didn't want a scene. Naomi could use that. "I don't know what game you're playing," Vivian said quietly, "but it's not going to work." Naomi stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You have a picture of my mother in your wallet. I want to know why." Vivian's jaw tightened. For a split second, Naomi thought she might actually say something, that maybe, just maybe, she'd get the truth right here. But then, Vivian did what she always did. She shut down. She exhaled sharply as if bored. "You're making a mistake." Naomi's pulse kicked up. "The only mistake I made was letting you walk away the first time." Vivian's lips parted, but before she could respond, someone called her name. An older man, tall, imposing, with piercing blue eyes that froze Naomi in place. The same blue eyes she had seen in pictures of Richard Hartley. Her stomach dropped. She didn't need to ask who he was. She already knew. Vivian turned smoothly, her voice even but clipped. "Uncle James." James Hartley, Richard's younger brother. Naomi felt a cold weight settle in her chest. If James was here, that meant she was in far more danger than she realized. She should have walked away. She should have left the conversation at that. But she had come this far, and she wasn't leaving without the truth. Naomi's pulse hammered in her ears as James Hartley approached. He was taller than she expected, his tailored suit emphasizing his broad frame. His silver hair was neatly combed back, his expression unreadable. But his eyes, they were sharp, piercing, like they saw through her. For a brief moment, Naomi wondered if he recognized her, if he saw something familiar in her face, or worse, if he already knew exactly who she was. Vivian turned to him smoothly, her posture stiff. "Uncle James," she greeted, her voice even. "I didn't know you'd be here." James's gaze flickered to Naomi for a fraction of a second before he looked back at Vivian. "I wouldn't miss an event honoring my late brother's legacy." His tone was casual, but there was something underneath it, something calculated. Vivian forced a polite smile. Of course. Naomi knew she had seconds before this moment passed, before Vivian or James swept her aside like she didn't exist. She took a breath, gathering every ounce of courage she had left. She looked directly at James. "Did you know my mother?" A flicker of something, recognition, annoyance, crossed his face, but it was gone just as fast. James raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" Vivian stepped in, her tone clipped. "She's no one. Just a—" "No." Naomi's voice cut through, sharper than she intended. "I'm not no one." She turned to James again. "My mother's name was Diana Brooks, and your niece has a photograph of her. I want to know why." The air between them shifted. For the first time, James Hartley really looked at her. His gaze traveled over her face, slow, assessing. Naomi felt her skin prickle under the scrutiny, but she refused to look away. Then, something changed in his expression. It wasn't shock. It wasn't recognition. It was confirmation. He knew. Naomi's chest tightened. James exhaled slowly. "You should leave." Vivian shot Naomi a victorious glance, but Naomi barely noticed. Because the way James had said it, low, deliberate, almost like a warning, made her stomach twist. She took a step forward. "So you do know." James's jaw tensed. His hands slid into his pockets, his stance casual, controlled, but his eyes gave him away. Before he could speak, Vivian grabbed Naomi's arm. "You've made your point," she hissed under her breath. "Leave." Naomi yanked her arm back, her heart pounding. "I'm not going anywhere until I get answers." A small, sharp smile tugged at the corner of James's mouth. "And what answers do you think you'll get?" Naomi hesitated, just for a second, but James Hartley saw it, and he pounced. "You think you're the first person to come looking for something from this family?" he murmured, stepping closer. You think my brother didn't have a dozen people claiming to be something to him? Naomi's stomach twisted. I'm not just anyone. James tilted his head. Aren't you? The dismissal burned, but Naomi stood her ground. My mother kept a photograph of Richard Hartley. She never told me why, but now I know why, don't I? Her voice was steady, even as her hands clenched at her sides. James's gaze darkened. That's enough, Vivian snapped. James exhaled through his nose, shaking his head slightly, as if he was almost amused. You want the truth? He asked, voice low. Here it is. He leaned in, his words just for her. You don't belong here. Naomi's breath caught. James straightened, smoothing a hand over his suit jacket. Take my advice, Miss Brooks. His voice was cool, dismissive. Walk away while you still can. The words hung in the air, heavy, final. Naomi's nails dug into her palms. She should be afraid. She should be furious. But all she felt was a cold certainty settling in her chest. She had come looking for answers, and she had just found exactly what she needed to keep going. Naomi walked out of the Hartley International headquarters, but her mind was still inside that ballroom, trapped in the suffocating weight of James Hartley's words. You don't belong here. The phrase echoed in her head, twisting in her chest like a dull blade. It wasn't just a dismissal, it was a warning. A carefully crafted, well-practiced warning, the kind only someone who had buried secrets for decades could deliver without hesitation. She didn't know what scared her more, the fact that James Hartley had refused to acknowledge the truth, or the fact that he hadn't even bothered to deny it. Her mother's name, Diana Brooks, had meant something to him. She had seen it in his face, in the flicker of restraint behind his calculating blue eyes. Naomi tightened her coat around herself as she stepped onto the damp sidewalk, the night air cool against her flushed skin. Marcus was waiting in his car a block away, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel as she climbed into the passenger seat. You're still in one piece, or he muttered, pulling away from the curb. That's a good sign. Naomi didn't answer right away. She stared straight ahead, the Chicago skyline a blur of neon lights outside the window. I met James Hartley, she said finally. Marcus's hands tensed on the wheel. And? Naomi exhaled sharply. He knows. Marcus didn't look at her, but she saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. You're sure? She turned to face him. He told me to walk away. Marcus let out a low whistle. That's rich. Like that's ever stopped you before? Naomi huffed out a humorless laugh. It gets worse. Marcus flicked his gaze toward her. Of course it does. Vivian had my mother's photograph, Naomi said, and now James won't even acknowledge her existence? She shook her head, which means whatever happened between my mother and Richard Hartley, it wasn't just some forgotten relationship. Marcus drummed his fingers on the wheel. You think they forced her out? Naomi swallowed hard. I think they erased her. The words settled between them, thick, suffocating. Marcus let out a slow breath. So what's the next move? Naomi looked out the window, her pulse steady now. I find proof, she said. Marcus smirked. Figured you'd say that. The next morning, Naomi sat at her tiny kitchen table, her laptop open, notes scattered across the surface. She had spent half the night digging through every public record she could find. Company reports, archived news articles, even old employee rosters from Hartley International Air. Nothing. As if her mother had never worked there at all. But Naomi knew that wasn't true. She remembered it. The long shifts, the airport stories, the times her mother had come home exhausted, but still somehow smiling. She rubbed her temples. They buried her. If the Hartleys had the power to wipe Diana Brooks from company records, they had the power to erase more than that. Naomi clicked out of the company databases, switching tactics. She searched for people who had worked at Hartley International Air during her mother's time there, and that's when she found him. Henry Calhoun, a former aircraft maintenance supervisor. Employed at Hartley International Air from 1987 to 2005, and then suddenly let go. There were no details in the articles, just a short mention in a union dispute case from years ago. Naomi's stomach tightened. Maybe he knows something. She grabbed her phone and dialed the number listed under his name. It rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. This is Henry. Naomi hesitated for only a second before speaking. Mr. Calhoun, my name is Naomi Brooks. I, I think you knew my mother. There was a beat of silence. Then, who did you say your mother was? Naomi took a steady breath. Diana Brooks. She worked at Hartley International Air in the late 90s and early 2000s. Another pause. But this one was different, not confusion, hesitation. I don't know anything about that, he said too quickly. Sorry. Naomi's grip tightened on the phone. Please, I need to understand what happened. A long silence. Then Henry sighed. Meet me at St. James Park. Tomorrow. Noon. The line went dead. Naomi slowly set the phone down, her pulse racing. She didn't know exactly what Henry Calhoun was going to tell her, but she knew one thing for sure. Whatever it was, the Hartleys didn't want her to hear it. The next day, Naomi arrived at St. James Park 10 minutes early. The city stretched around her, a mix of quiet and movement, the occasional jogger passing by, the distant hum of traffic. It was an overcast afternoon, the clouds hanging low like they were trying to press the world beneath them. She scanned the park, looking for Henry Calhoun. She spotted him near a bench under a large oak tree, an older black man, late 60s, wearing a worn-out Cubs cap and a heavy jacket despite the mild temperature. Naomi hesitated before approaching. There was something about the way he sat, stiff, cautious, like a man who had spent years looking over his shoulder. She took a breath and walked toward him. You're early, he said, his voice low, rough from years of smoking or just life itself. Naomi sat down beside him, leaving a careful gap between them. You picked the place, she said. Henry exhaled, rubbing his fingers together. Yeah, and I also picked the time. He flicked his gaze toward her. That means you listen. Naomi held his stare. I wouldn't be here if I didn't need answers. Henry nodded slowly, looking out at the park. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then finally, I knew your mother. Naomi felt her chest tighten. She was good people, Henry continued, his voice softer now. Worked hard, kept her head down. Too damn smart for the job they gave her, but she never complained. Just did her work and went home. Naomi swallowed. Then why did they try to erase her? Henry let out a low chuckle, but there was no humor in it. Because she knew too much. Naomi frowned. About what? Henry looked at her then, really looked at her, like he was trying to decide just how much to say. Finally, he shook his head. Not here. Naomi's frustration flared. Then where? Henry exhaled through his nose, looking around like he expected someone to be watching. Then in a voice so low she barely caught it, he muttered, There's a storage facility on 54th. Unit C12. He met her gaze. What you're looking for? It's there. Naomi's pulse kicked up. Before she could press for more, Henry pushed himself up from the bench. This conversation didn't happen, he muttered, adjusting his cap. Then without another word, he walked away. Naomi sat there, her heart pounding. What the hell was in that storage unit? And more importantly, who didn't want her to find it? Marcus wasn't happy. You seriously want to walk into some random storage unit in the middle of nowhere? He asked, pacing Naomi's tiny apartment later that night. Naomi crossed her arms. It's not random. Henry told me my answers are there. Marcus stopped, narrowing his eyes. And you trust him? Naomi hesitated. I don't think he'd send me there if he thought it was a trap. Marcus shook his head. You're assuming the Hartleys haven't already been there first. Naomi clenched her jaw. Then I better get there before they know I'm looking. Marcus let out a frustrated sigh. Jesus, Naomi. He ran a hand through his hair. Fine, but we're not going in there blind. Naomi frowned. What does that mean? Marcus grabbed his coat. It means we're going now. The storage facility was on the outskirts of the city, a row of metal doors stretching beneath flickering overhead lights. The place looked half abandoned, the kind of spot where secrets went to be buried. Naomi and Marcus pulled into an empty lot near Unit C12, the number painted in faded white on the metal door. Marcus turned off the engine. Last chance to back out. Naomi ignored him, stepping out of the car. They reached the unit, and Naomi took the key Henry had slipped into her hand before leaving the park. She slid it into the lock, her fingers only slightly trembling. The latch clicked. She lifted the door. Inside, dust coated every surface, and the air smelled of old paper and metal. But there, in the center of the unit, was a single locked filing cabinet. Naomi's stomach clenched. Marcus stepped beside her. Well, that looks promising. Naomi reached for the cabinet. It was locked, but Marcus was already digging into his pocket. Lucky for you, he muttered, pulling out a small crowbar. I'm prepared for bad decisions. Naomi didn't argue. Marcus wedged the tool into the lock and forced it open with a loud snap. Naomi pulled open the top drawer. Her breath caught. Inside were folders upon folders, all labeled with neat handwriting. But one, sitting at the very front, made Naomi's heart skip a beat. Diana Brooks, 1998 to 2001. Naomi reached for it with shaky fingers, flipping it open. Inside were copies of emails, flight logs, reports. She scanned the papers, her eyes catching on one name over and over again. Richard Hartley. And then, the final document, a letter, handwritten, her mother's signature at the bottom. Naomi's fingers tightened around the paper as she began to read. And by the time she reached the last sentence, her whole world had changed. Naomi's breath hitched as her eyes scanned the words on the aged paper. Her mother's handwriting was unmistakable. The slanted cursive, the way the letters curved just slightly at the ends. It was all too familiar. She swallowed hard and began reading. Richard, I can't do this anymore. I thought keeping quiet would be enough, that I could move on and build a life without looking over my shoulder. But they won't let me. You won't let me. I know what you're trying to do, but it's too late. They've already decided how this ends. I won't let them erase me, Richard, and I won't let them erase our daughter. But I won't fight them either. I'm done fighting. If anything happens to me, make sure Naomi knows the truth. That's all I ask. Naomi's hands shook as she reached the bottom of the letter. Her mother had signed it, Diana Brooks, and beneath the signature, scribbled hastily, was a date, June 14th, 2001, the day before she packed up their tiny apartment and moved them out of Chicago. The day before she disappeared from the Hartleys' world forever. Marcus let out a low whistle beside her. Jesus! Naomi's pulse pounded in her ears. Her mother had tried to leave something behind, a message, a warning, but Richard Hartley had never passed it on. Instead, he let Naomi grow up never knowing the truth. She clenched her jaw, gripping the paper so tightly it threatened to tear. Marcus exhaled. So, we're past the point of this being a coincidence, huh? Naomi let out a sharp, bitter laugh. We were past that the moment James Hartley looked me in the eye and told me I didn't belong here. She flipped through the other papers, scanning reports, receipts, and internal memos from Hartley International. The more she read, the clearer it became. Her mother hadn't just worked for the company. She had been involved in something big, something the Hartleys had buried. Naomi pressed her fingers to her temple. I need more. Marcus glanced at her. More than a handwritten letter where your mom straight up says they were trying to erase her? Naomi met his gaze, her heart racing. Yes. She wasn't just looking for answers anymore. She was looking for proof. The drive back to Naomi's apartment was quiet. She stared out the window, her mind spinning. Her mother's words echoed in her head. I won't let them erase our daughter. Naomi clenched her fists. They almost did. If she hadn't found that photograph in Vivian's wallet, if she hadn't pushed, if she hadn't refused to walk away, she never would have known. Now there was no stopping. She had to know everything. Marcus pulled up to her apartment building and put the car in park. So what's next? Naomi took a deep breath. I need to talk to Richard Hartley. Marcus stared at her. You mean the dead guy? Naomi shot him a look. He's not the only one who knows the truth. Marcus frowned. You're talking about Vivian. Naomi nodded. Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. She's not just going to spill her family's secrets because you ask nicely. Naomi huffed. Then I won't ask nicely. Marcus let out a low whistle. All right, how do we get her alone? Naomi thought for a moment. Then slowly a plan formed in her head. A risky plan, a dangerous one. But at this point, Naomi had nothing to lose. She turned to Marcus, her eyes burning with determination. We make her come to me. Naomi sat at her kitchen table, fingers tapping against the worn wooden surface. The file from the storage unit lay open in front of her, the pages spreading out like pieces of a puzzle she was finally beginning to understand. Vivian Hartley was the key to everything. Her mother had been forced into silence. Richard Hartley had chosen his legacy over the truth. James Hartley had warned her to walk away, but Vivian had kept that photograph. That meant something. Naomi took a steady breath. If she wanted the truth, she couldn't keep chasing Vivian. She had to make Vivian come to her. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to the number Marcus had given her. Elliot Graves, a reporter. A man with a reputation for uncovering corporate scandals, high-profile corruption, and cover-ups powerful families never wanted exposed. Naomi hit call. The phone rang twice before a smooth practice voice answered. Graves. She gripped the phone. I have a story for you. A pause. Everyone thinks they have a story. Naomi leaned forward, staring at the letter from her mother. This one's about the Hartleys. A longer pause. Then, I'm listening. They met the next morning at a small diner on the north side of the city, far from Naomi's apartment, far from anywhere the Hartleys might expect her to be. Elliot Graves was older than she expected, somewhere in his early 50s, with graying hair and a tired expression that said he had seen more than his fair share of stories like this. Naomi slid the file across the table. My mother worked for Hartley International Air for years. Then she disappeared from their records. They erased her. Elliot flipped through the pages, his expression unreadable. You have proof of that? Naomi tapped her finger against the letter. She wrote this to Richard Hartley. He never responded, never told me the truth. Elliot exhaled, setting the paper down. That's a compelling letter, but it's not enough. Naomi's stomach tightened. What do you mean? Elliot looked at her. You're talking about one of the most powerful families in the country. A letter like this? He shook his head. They'll say she was lying, that she was bitter, that she was trying to manipulate Richard. Naomi's jaw clenched. Elliot leaned back in his seat. I need something concrete, a smoking gun. Naomi swallowed. And if I get it? Elliot studied her for a moment, then he nodded. Then we run it. Naomi let out a slow breath. This was it. She was going to expose the Hartleys. That night, Naomi sat in her apartment, staring at the only clue she had left. Vivian's name. If she wanted the smoking gun, she needed Vivian to give it to her. So she took a risk. She pulled out her phone, opened a new email, and typed, To Vivian Hartley. Subject, I know the truth. Vivian, I know about my mother. I know what your family did. I know what your father never told me. If you want me to stay quiet, meet me tomorrow. 8 p.m. Hotel Langston, rooftop bar. Come alone. Naomi. She hovered over the send button, heart racing. Then before she could overthink it, she hit send. There was no turning back now. She had set the trap. Now she just had to see if Vivian would walk into it. The following evening, Naomi arrived at Hotel Langston 15 minutes early. The rooftop bar was upscale, the kind of place where powerful people met behind closed doors, where deals were made over expensive cocktails. She doubted anyone would suspect what she was really here for. She took a seat at a small table near the edge of the rooftop, overlooking the glowing skyline of Chicago. The city lights stretched out endlessly, their golden reflections shimmering against the river below. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. She wasn't here to admire the view. She was here to force Vivian Hartley into giving her the truth, if she showed up. Naomi exhaled, resisting the urge to check her phone for the 100th time. No reply, no confirmation. Maybe Vivian had decided to ignore her. Maybe Naomi had miscalculated, had pushed too hard, too soon. But then, movement. She saw her before she heard her, Vivian Hartley stepping onto the rooftop, looking just as put together as ever. Her dark blue dress was sleek, professional, and her expression unreadable. For a moment, Naomi felt the weight of what she had done. She had baited a Hartley, and Vivian had come. Vivian's gaze swept over the rooftop before landing on Naomi. Their eyes locked. Then slowly, Vivian walked toward her. She took the seat across from Naomi, adjusting her clutch on the table with a calm precision that made Naomi's stomach tighten. You have my attention, Vivian said. Her voice was quiet, deliberate, controlled. Now tell me why I shouldn't have you thrown out of here. Naomi leaned forward, her pulse steady despite the fire burning in her chest. Because if you do that, I'll take everything I know straight to the press. A flicker of something, annoyance, concern, passed over Vivian's face, but she masked it quickly. Naomi pressed on. I know my mother wasn't just some employee your family erased. She knew something big enough to make your father turn his back on her. Vivian exhaled slowly, tapping a manicured nail against the table. You're making assumptions you can't prove, she said smoothly. Naomi's jaw tightened. Not yet. Vivian tilted her head. And what exactly do you think you're going to accomplish by dragging me into this? Naomi stared at her, watching for any sign of hesitation. I think you kept that photograph for a reason, she said. Vivian stiffened. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but Naomi saw it. For the first time, Vivian had cracked. Naomi leaned in, lowering her voice. You've spent your whole life protecting your father's legacy, but you kept that picture. Why? Vivian exhaled, shifting in her seat. Do you think this is some kind of game? She asked, voice sharper now. That you can just waltz into my life and demand answers? Naomi's nails dug into her palm. This isn't about you, she said. It's about my mother, and whether you like it or not, you're a part of this. Vivian didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked away, her gaze distant, almost calculating. For the first time, Naomi wondered if she had underestimated her. Finally, after a long silence, Vivian turned back. Her expression was unreadable, but when she spoke, her voice was softer. You really want to know the truth? Naomi's pulse jumped. Yes. Vivian nodded once, then leaned forward, lowering her voice. Then meet me tomorrow, midnight, Briarwick Airfield. Naomi frowned. What's at the airfield? Vivian stood, smoothing out her dress. The proof you're looking for. Then without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving Naomi sitting there, heart pounding, knowing that she had just crossed a line she could never come back from. Naomi sat in her car outside Briarwick Airfield, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The digital clock on the dashboard glowed 11:54 p.m. Vivian had told her to come alone. Marcus had insisted on coming with her, but Naomi had refused. This was her fight, her mother's truth. She couldn't afford any distractions. The airfield was quiet, almost eerie, the floodlights casting long shadows over the empty tarmac. In the distance, she could see a few parked private jets, their sleek forms barely visible in the dim lighting. She checked her phone. No messages. Vivian wasn't the type to be late. Naomi took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, her boots crunching softly against the gravel. The air smelled of jet fuel and cold metal, the distant hum of an engine, the only sound breaking the silence. Then movement. Vivian emerged from the shadows, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement as she approached. She wore a long black coat over her dress, her expression unreadable. You actually came, Vivian said, stopping a few feet away. Naomi crossed her arms. You said you had proof. Vivian studied her for a moment, then exhaled. Follow me. She turned and walked toward one of the older hangars near the edge of the airfield. Naomi hesitated for only a second before following. The metal door creaked as Vivian pulled it open, revealing a dimly lit interior. Stacks of old files and storage containers lined the walls. It looked abandoned, forgotten. Vivian gestured toward a file cabinet against the far wall. Everything you need is in there. Naomi's heart pounded as she stepped forward, yanking open the top drawer. Inside were files, hundreds of them. She rifled through them, her fingers trembling as she searched for her mother's name. And then, there it was. Diana Brooks. Termination file. Naomi pulled it out and flipped it open, her eyes scanning the pages. It wasn't just a standard termination notice. There were signed non-disclosure agreements, warnings about confidentiality breaches, and she froze. A typed memo dated June 13th, 2001, from Richard Hartley himself. Ensure that Ms. Brooks understands the consequences of speaking further. We cannot afford another incident. This matter needs to be handled immediately. Naomi's breath caught. Handled. That wasn't a simple firing. That was a threat. Her mother hadn't left Hartley International by choice. She had been forced out, silenced. A cold chill ran down Naomi's spine. Vivian shifted behind her. Now you understand. Naomi turned, holding up the memo. Why are you giving this to me? Vivian exhaled sharply, looking more tired than Naomi had ever seen her. Because I was a child when this happened. I didn't have a say in any of it. But I kept that photograph because I always knew something wasn't right. Naomi clenched her jaw. So what now? You think handing me a file makes up for what your family did? Vivian's expression hardened. You wanted the truth. I just gave it to you. Naomi shook her head. This isn't justice. Vivian's lips pressed into a thin line. Justice doesn't exist for people like us. The words hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. Naomi looked down at the file in her hands. This was bigger than she had imagined. This wasn't just about her mother. This was about every person the Hartleys had erased. She met Vivian's gaze, her voice steady. I'm going to expose this. Vivian didn't argue. She just gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I know. And for the first time, Naomi saw it. Vivian wasn't trying to protect her family anymore. She was trying to burn it all down. Naomi sat in her apartment, the file spread out in front of her, the weight of it pressing down on her like an anchor. This was it, the truth she had been chasing. But knowing the truth and exposing it were two different things. She had proof now, the termination order, the NDA agreements, the memo from Richard Hartley himself. But Marcus had been right before. The Hartleys were too powerful for a single piece of paper to bring them down. She needed leverage. Her phone buzzed. Marcus. She answered without hesitation. I have the file. A pause. Then, and it's worse than I thought. Naomi's voice was tight. This wasn't just about firing my mother. They made sure she disappeared. Marcus let out a low whistle. Damn! I need to go public. Marcus sighed. Yeah, except they're going to crush you the second you do. Naomi leaned back, rubbing a hand over her face. I know. You need something bigger. Marcus hesitated. What about Vivian? Naomi exhaled. Vivian was a wild card. She had handed Naomi the file, but that didn't mean she was fully on her side. Still, she gave me this, Naomi admitted, and I don't think she's done yet. Marcus was silent for a moment. Then maybe it's time to push her. The next morning, Naomi sent Vivian a text. We need to meet. One last time. Vivian responded almost immediately. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., Hotel Langston, Suite 1502. Naomi stared at the screen. A hotel suite. Not a public rooftop. Not a bar. Vivian was done hiding. Naomi arrived at Hotel Langston the next morning, her pulse steady. She wasn't nervous. Not anymore. She took the elevator up to the 15th floor, the tension growing with every passing second. The door to Suite 1502 was slightly ajar. She pushed it open. Vivian stood near the window, her back to Naomi, staring out at the city below. You came, Vivian said without turning. Naomi stepped inside, closing the door behind her. I didn't have much of a choice. Vivian finally turned, her expression unreadable. You're going public, aren't you? Naomi nodded. Vivian exhaled, crossing her arms. Then let me help you. Naomi blinked. Excuse me. Vivian walked to a small safe in the corner of the room, entered a code, and pulled out a USB drive. She held it up. This, she said, is everything my father never wanted the world to see. Naomi's breath caught. What's on it? Vivian's jaw tightened. Emails, internal reports. Proof that your mother wasn't the only one they erased. Naomi felt her stomach drop. How many? Vivian hesitated. Then, dozens. Naomi stared at her. This wasn't just about her mother anymore. This was about every person the Hartleys had destroyed to protect their legacy. Naomi reached for the drive, but Vivian didn't let go. Their eyes met. Vivian's voice was quiet. Once you release this, there's no going back. Naomi's fingers tightened around the drive. I'm not going back, she said. Vivian searched her face for a moment. Then slowly she let go. Naomi held the drive in her hands, feeling the weight of it. She had everything she needed now. Now it was time to burn the Hartleys to the ground. Naomi sat in Marcus's apartment, the USB drive in her hands, feeling the weight of what she was about to do. The sun was just beginning to set outside, casting a warm orange glow over the city, but inside the air was thick with tension. Marcus paced behind her, rubbing the back of his neck. I still think we need to be smart about this. Naomi turned, raising an eyebrow. You think I'm not being smart? Marcus exhaled sharply. I think you're about to go to war with one of the most powerful families in the country. Naomi tightened her grip on the drive. That war started the second they tried to erase my mother. Marcus didn't argue. He just dropped into the chair across from her, rubbing his temples. So what's the plan? Naomi took a deep breath. We're going public, but we're not just handing this over to one reporter. Marcus frowned. What do you mean? Naomi leaned forward, her pulse steady. We don't give the Hartleys a chance to contain this. We make sure everyone sees it at the same time. Marcus's eyes widened slightly. You're talking about a full release? Naomi nodded. Elliot Graves. National news outlets. Online forums. We leak it everywhere at once. Marcus let out a low whistle. That's ballsy. Naomi didn't blink. It's necessary. Marcus studied her for a moment, then finally nodded. All right. He reached for his laptop. Let's bring them down. They spent the next 3 hours organizing the files, cross-referencing emails, structuring the evidence into a clear, undeniable case. It was all there. Years of corruption, employees being silenced, entire lives being wiped from company records. And at the center of it all, Richard Hartley. Naomi's stomach twisted as she read through the documents. Her mother wasn't the only one. There were dozens of names. People who had spoken out. People who had disappeared from the records just like Diana Brooks. People whose stories had never been told. Until now. Marcus clicked his tongue. Damn, no way they talked their way out of this. Naomi exhaled. That's the point. She reached for her phone, pulling up Elliot Graves' number. The moment he answered, she didn't waste time. I have what you need. There was a beat of silence. Then, how bad is it? Naomi stared at the files on the screen. It's enough to destroy them. Elliot exhaled. Send it over. Naomi glanced at Marcus. He nodded once. She hit send. There was no turning back now. Within minutes, Elliot responded. This goes live at 7 a.m. tomorrow. Naomi's hands tightened into fists. Tomorrow the world would know the truth. Tomorrow the Hartleys would finally face justice. The next morning, Naomi sat in her apartment, her laptop open in front of her. The clock on the screen read 6:59 a.m. Her heart pounded. Marcus sat beside her, bouncing his leg anxiously. 30 seconds. Naomi exhaled, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. She had barely slept. None of that mattered now. The moment the clock flipped to 7 a.m., it began. The first notification popped up on her phone, then another, and another. Elliot Graves had kept his word. The article went live, spreading across major news sites, social media platforms, and online forums in real time. Hartley International Air exposed in cover-up scandal. The headline screamed from the screen, bold and undeniable. Beneath it, a subheading. Exclusive report reveals decades of corruption, silenced employees, and erased records tied to airline mogul Richard Hartley. Naomi's stomach twisted as she scrolled. Her mother's name was there. For the first time in over 2 decades, Diana Brooks existed in the public record again. Marcus let out a low whistle. Damn! Naomi's phone buzzed with incoming messages, some from unknown numbers, others from reporters looking for a comment. She ignored them all. Instead, she refreshed the page. The story was exploding. The Hartleys were trending nationwide. People were demanding investigations, questioning the legitimacy of Hartley International Air's entire history. Then, a new headline appeared on the news ticker. Hartley International Air responds to allegations. Statement from CEO James Hartley coming soon. Naomi's jaw clenched. James wasn't going to go down without a fight. Marcus shook his head. That man is going to lie through his teeth. Naomi exhaled sharply. Let him try. She wasn't done yet. She pulled out her phone and sent a single text. To Vivian Hartley. It's time. Your move. If James wanted to control the narrative, Vivian had to be the one to tear it down from the inside. There was no response. Naomi watched the news feed as reporters gathered outside Hartley International Air's headquarters. Cameras flashing, microphones shoved forward as they waited for James Hartley to step out and defend his family's legacy. And then, right before the cameras went live, her phone buzzed. Vivian's name flashed on the screen. One message. 2 words. I'm ready. Naomi's pulse jumped. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The press conference was set to start at 11 a.m., and by 10:45, reporters had already filled the space outside Hartley International Air's headquarters. Cameras lined the sidewalk, their flashes reflecting off the towering glass building. A podium had been set up in front of the entrance, with a backdrop bearing the company's sleek, polished logo. Naomi sat in a parked car across the street, gripping her phone as she watched the live coverage stream on Marcus's laptop. "Here we go," Marcus muttered, turning up the volume. The crowd hushed as James Hartley stepped up to the podium, his expression calm, practiced. He wore a navy suit, his silver hair neatly styled, his posture giving off an air of complete control. The man was a master at playing the media. James took a slow breath before speaking. "These allegations are baseless," he said, his voice steady. "Hartley International Air has always upheld the highest ethical standards, and we stand by our record. Any claims of wrongdoing are exaggerated and deeply misleading." Naomi's nails dug into her palm. "Liar. I assure our employees and customers that Hartley International remains committed to integrity and excellence," James continued, "and we will take legal action against those spreading false and defamatory statements." Marcus let out a low whistle. "Yep, knew that was coming." Naomi's phone buzzed. A text from Vivian. 5 minutes. Watch. Naomi sucked in a breath. Vivian was about to make her move. Back on the screen, a reporter interrupted James's speech. "Mr. Hartley, what do you say to the claims that multiple employees were forced out of the company and erased from records, including a woman named Diana Brooks?" James barely flinched. "I have no knowledge of any such incidents." Naomi's blood boiled. Then, movement in the crowd. A woman in a dark gray suit stepped forward, slipping past the line of reporters until she was within full view of the cameras. Naomi's breath caught. Vivian. The second James saw her, his face changed. He hadn't expected this. Vivian's voice rang out, loud and clear. "That's a lie." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters turned their cameras, shoving microphones forward. James's jaw tightened. "Vivian!" But she cut him off. "My father knew exactly what happened to Diana Brooks, and so did you." James froze. Vivian turned to the cameras. "I have proof that my father covered up employee terminations, including Diana Brooks. I have internal emails and documents confirming that records were erased." The reporters went wild. "Why are you speaking out now?" someone shouted. Vivian held her ground. "Because it's time," she said simply. James went pale. Vivian turned to face him directly. "How long were you going to keep covering for him, Uncle James? Or did you think no one would ever find out?" James's hand tightened around the podium. "This is not the place for—" "No, it is," Vivian cut in. Louder now, stronger. "The world deserves to know what this family has done." Naomi's chest tightened. She had done it. Vivian had just blown the whole thing wide open. James turned back to the cameras, his expression blank. But Naomi knew what was happening. He was unraveling. Marcus let out a low breath. "Holy hell!" Naomi couldn't take her eyes off the screen. James had spent his entire career controlling the narrative. But this he couldn't control. Vivian had just set fire to the Hartley legacy, and there was no putting it out. The press conference descended into chaos. Reporters shouted over each other, cameras flashed in every direction, and James Hartley stood at the podium, visibly shaken for the first time in his life. Vivian had just shattered everything. Naomi watched from the car, gripping her phone so tightly that her knuckles ached. She had won, but it wasn't over yet. James cleared his throat, his composure slipping. This is a family matter," he said, his voice lacking its usual control. "And I will not stand here and discuss baseless accusations made by my—" "Your niece?" Vivian cut in, her voice sharp. "Who has seen the documents herself?" The reporters pounced. "Ms. Hartley, are you confirming that your father covered up illegal terminations? Do you have evidence? Are you saying the Hartleys knowingly erased employees from their records?" Vivian stood tall, her shoulders squared. I am saying, she said, her voice unwavering, that I have the proof, and I have already given it to the press. James visibly paled. Marcus let out a low whistle. She really went for the kill. Naomi's phone buzzed. A text from Elliot Graves. Got the full document drop. Uploading now? The world is about to know everything. Naomi exhaled, her heart pounding. It was done. James grabbed the podium, his fingers gripping the edges so tightly that the veins in his hands stood out. This press conference is over, he snapped, his voice shaking with barely concealed fury. He turned and stormed inside the Hartley International headquarters, leaving the cameras rolling. Vivian didn't follow. Instead, she looked directly into the cameras and spoke the final words that sealed the Hartley family's fate. I won't be part of the cover-up anymore. Then with a quiet breath, she turned and walked away. The screen cut to black. Naomi sat back in her seat, staring at the laptop. The news cycle had already exploded. The internet was on fire. The Hartleys were finished. Marcus turned to her. So, how does it feel? Naomi took a slow breath. It didn't feel like victory. Not yet, because her mother was still gone. Because justice wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about making sure no one else got erased the way she had. She met Marcus's gaze. We're not done. Marcus raised an eyebrow. No? Naomi looked back at the screen, where headlines flashed across every news site in the country. No, she said quietly. This is just the beginning. She wasn't just going to expose the Hartleys. She was going to make sure they never did this to anyone ever again. And this time, the whole world was watching. The truth has a way of rising, no matter how deeply it's buried. Naomi's journey wasn't just about uncovering the past. It was about reclaiming a voice that had been stolen. Power can silence people, but it can't erase them. Not if someone is willing to fight back. So tell us, if you were in Naomi's shoes, would you have stopped or would you have risked it all for justice? Let us know in the comments below. And if you love stories like this, stories of resilience, truth, and standing up to power, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next.